Oh, thank you. So good to see everyone this morning. I mentioned this in the first hour, but I'll just, for sake of, in case you weren't here, I'm planning and we'll be preparing a report on the trip overall that I plan to present next Sunday, and at the 9 o'clock hour, and possibly both. I don't know. Don't have it all organized yet, so there's a lot of information, a lot of stuff that I'd like to share, but I don't have that prepared yet. It'll take a while to go through everything, the pictures, and kind of put it all together. But today I want to share just the main thing, the main kind of lesson I think that jumped out at me was what I experienced in the terms of the hospitality of the people while I was there. So I used my little journal that I got, and I wrote this outline down while I was there. Some ideas, some observations, some verses came to mind, and that's what I want to share with you this morning. And I'll have more to say about the whole story next week, Lord willing. So what I experienced really was, it challenged me and humbled me and made me think there's a lot of lessons here that I could take away from this that I want to share with you. And there's a lot of cultural differences, needless to say. And there's no way that we could expect them to become like us, or that we would expect to become like them in terms of our culture. That's just, that's normal. That's part of it. But there's good and bad, I think, in every culture. What I want to focus on is some of the really beautiful sides of the culture that I experienced, and how I think we can be encouraged by that in our own walk with God as well. So we're going to talk about the subject of hospitality. Of course, this is a biblical subject. Let's turn to Romans chapter 12. Kurt read for this for us at the 9 o'clock hour. In Romans 12, Paul starts to get into the kind of the practical lessons part of Romans. He says in verse 10, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. And then down in verse 13, he says, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. I don't talk a lot about Greek, but I want to share with you this Greek word. Mainly, I don't talk a lot because I don't have enough, I'm not qualified really. But from what I understand about this word, it is philoxenia. And so that's an interesting combination of words. Philo meaning love and xenia meaning stranger. So the word means sort of something literally like showing love to strangers. And we get from that hospitality. So we sometimes use hospitality to talk about, like I can show hospitality to you, and you can show, even though we're family, we're like, we know each other really well, you could still call that hospitality, showing some kindness to even somebody that you know. But the original concept of the word has to do with how you would show kindness or love to a stranger. That's really kind of at the heart of the idea of hospitality. And of course, we were strangers to them and they were strangers to us, so it captures that thought well. Another thing that's interesting about this word xenia here, and the root word is xenos or xeno, you might have heard this term xenophobia. I don't know if you've heard that term or not, but it means like the fear of something different, the fear of people who are different. And there's been a kind of a wave of that has swept through politics around the globe, of a fear of outsiders, a fear of others, a fear of somebody from somewhere else. And that's true in India as well. Their current president kind of stoked some of those fears, and he's a nationalist kind of guy. And he's got people kind of suspicious and concerned about outsiders, including people from America. So there's in some parts it's worse than others, but there's kind of a fascination I could feel wherever I went. People were kind of fascinated to see me because there wasn't anybody else that looked like me around there. But there were also, if there was somebody who would come up and be really friendly, there'd be a group of people standing over here that were just watching. And I got the sense that they were all just trying to figure out, what was I up to? Why was I there? And in fact, they would ask Susanto, the guy that went with us, a lot of times he would tell me when we would leave that they came up to him and said, what is he doing here? Why is he with you? And what are you guys doing? So there's a general kind of fear of others. That's xenophobia, a fear of strangers. But philoxenia is showing love to strangers. So it's interesting kind of contrast between kind of being afraid of people who are different or strangers versus showing kindness to people who are different or who are strangers. And I experienced a whole lot of that. So I want to just share several examples of this and some scriptures that I think fit well with it. First, let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians 8. Of course, what's humbling about these experiences of their hospitality is that practically everybody that I met and talked to is very poor by our standards. They're it's the economy there is not good, and most of them are whatever they do for the day that they're working at, and it's usually a lot of trade. A lot of people are just sitting on the side of the road selling something, or the other thing that a lot of people do is work in the rice paddies, if you're down in that part of the country. But from what I was told and what I gathered, that their goal would be to make enough money today to buy the food they're going to eat that day. And that's pretty much the way that they live. It's every single day. And if you don't sell enough or buy enough, then you just don't have food to eat that day. But it's, sometimes people think paycheck to paycheck here or week to week. They're literally, from what I gathered, day to day, hoping to get enough coming in today to have something to eat that day. That's what the majority of the people are. And so when you understand that, you start to appreciate how when they want to share with you or they want to honor you with like a big meal, that's a huge expense. It's expensive for us to have company over. But imagine if you're just trying to save up, or if you just try to earn enough money to have something to eat today, to then invite people in your home and try to prepare a meal for them is a big expense. And it reminded me of what we read about in 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 and 2. He says, "We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that's been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy, their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part." And I really think that describes this as well, that they, without having very much at all, they were very, very generous. The very first place that we went that was in someone's home, when we arrived, they brought out this, they had a little table set up for us, and they had some fruit on the table, and they had these, they brought a little tray with these cups. I was expecting tea because that seems to be the national drink, but it was actually just warm milk. And if you don't mind raising your hand, I was just curious, who has ever drank milk that came like straight from a cow? Most of you, okay. Well, for me, this was a brand new experience. This was like totally new to me. I'd only ever had milk that came from the store in a jug, and it was very rich. I liked it a lot. It was really, really good. And it wasn't like burn your mouth hot, but it was pretty warm, and it was good. So I assumed they heated it up, and it wasn't that fresh, but it was warm milk. And then they had this fruit on the table. And I started to notice as we went places that they had this fruit. And so at this is a different house. We were sitting there, and I was a little scared to eat, I have to say, because I had heard about people getting sick when they travel in general, and then specifically getting sick when you travel to certain parts of the world because of things are not the same. They don't have that dishwasher with the high temperature setting that sanitizes everything. In fact, a lot of them have a hand pump well, and it's all just being kind of washed, that way. And I thought, and I'd been told, if you eat things that have been cooked, that's kind of safe. It's been boiled. So my goal was I'm only going to eat hot foods, things that have been like cooked, that are done, and things that are kind of room temperature, I was going to stay away from. So at first they had these plates of fruit, and some of it had been sliced up, and I was like, I don't know about eating that. I'm just going to skip on that just in case, I don't, because one thing, it's not the end of the world to get, upset stomach, but as much as we were traveling and with I didn't want to be, it would really throw off the trip to be 2 or 3 days down with some kind of bellyache. And, plus you're away from home and it's a bad place to be. I was worried about that. I'm thankful, and we prayed about this constantly, and we were very thankful that nobody got sick the whole time. And we didn't have any slowdowns due to, somebody had some sniffles and cold type stuff, but nobody got like digestive problems. So I was going to skip all this produce in the middle, because it wasn't cooked. But we were sitting there eating, and Susanta said, he's the local guy that we were with, he said, we don't usually eat apples. But it was a kind of a treat that they thought we liked apples. And one of the people had said that they had actually looked up on the internet, like what to serve us. And so I thought that was kind of funny because that's what we would do, you know. And they now, as poor as they are, they have phones, so that's they can Google stuff. But they had Googled or looked up on YouTube what to serve us, and so they had those red things right there. Look, strawberries are actually carrots. It's a red type of carrot, cucumbers, a little purple onion on the side there, I think, and then these are oranges and apples that they got because that's what we like apparently. And when I realized that, I'm like, okay, I've got to eat these things now. You can't. Somebody's gone out of their way to buy something that they don't normally eat. That's just to give you an idea, their meals would be like 9 out of 10 times what they would have rice, 100% of the time, and then some kind of gravy. They call a lot of it dal, which is made with lentils, and so they'd have some kind of a gravy that you put on the rice to make it, give you something to eat, and then maybe like a dish that would be either vegetables or something that you would put on top of that. So if you can kind of picture that plate, some rice on your plate, a little gravy, and some vegetables, and that's your meal. So normally it didn't include all the rest of this stuff. This was all special. So once I started like, oh, okay, then this is I felt kind of bad that maybe once or twice before that, they'd set out the fruit. I'm like, no thanks, I don't need any fruit. They'd gone to a lot of trouble. So I started eating that. And Lemmy said something one time as I was talking about being concerned. He said, well, we've prayed and we'll eat it. And I thought, you know what, that's true. You prayed, you give thanks, you eat it, and the Lord was with us and blessed us, and none of it bothered me. So I got bolder as the trip went on too. I was like, no, I don't have to be as afraid of all this as I was at the beginning. So anyway, that's first lesson, that they were generous, even though really they were, by our standards, they really didn't have a lot, but they were very generous. Also, we would, and Lemmy had told me this before we went, he said there'll be places where they're going to feed us and we will offer to help when we're done with that. And so if you want to do that, we did that individually. I brought some money from the congregation that we had agreed on ahead of time that would cover hotels and stuff like that. But to just give them some money to help them with their grocery costs, we would do that as we were leaving. And they were thankful for the help, because they really couldn't afford to do what they were doing for us. Next up, here's another house and more fruit, and it was and more cucumbers. They really must think we like cucumbers and carrots, but this fruit was all very good. I really like the bananas, and I like the fact that you have to peel them, because then it's it kind of comes in its own packaging from the Lord. So the next thing that you find out right away is, in their culture, they're huge about serving guests. And that reminds me of, let's look at Galatians chapter 5. In verse 13, which says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." Let me tell you, they have got this serving thing down to an art. Almost too much, really. It was a little uncomfortable with how much serving. But what they would do, invariably, everywhere we went, is they would set a table for us, and then they would, so we would sit down, and we would try to say, sit, but they're going to serve. And so you would sit there, and they would bring out all this stuff, and then they would start with the rice, and they would come over and they would put it on your plate, and they would keep putting until you kind of force them to stop. And then they would work their way around, and then they'd come out with the next dish, and they would serve that, and then they would set it down, they would serve the next thing. So they would load up your plate with food, which made it hard to be picky about what you're going to eat, because you're going to get some of just about all of it. You might as well just get ready. And then as soon as you would eat about half of any of it, they'd come and they would start putting, so if you were making a dent in the gravy stuff, here comes more gravy, and the whole time you're eating, they stand there. So you're eating, and they're just standing there watching you. and they're waiting to see what you're going to eat, and they'll give you some more of that as soon as you get, and you just about have to force them to quit giving you food. They want you to eat so much. The other thing, though, that was neat about that is that it was often a senior person who would do the serving. So you might think in some cultures, the way that it works is that the more senior people, like serving is something that was done by somebody maybe a lower status in a lot of cultures, I think. But in their case, it's an honor to be the one serving. And so like the oldest son or the father or somebody like that would be really a prominent person in the family would be the one who would stand there and dishing stuff on your plate the whole time you're eating. Children, other people would be kind of back out of the way. Sometimes they'd run them out, get out. And they'd go outside because they were always fascinated to see us, but they would shoo them away. And then the dad or the whoever would stand there and do the serving. In this family's case, this guy had come down. This is a brother to the man whose house we were in. He's the oldest brother. And it's a huge deal to be the older brother. The oldest brother has a lot of responsibilities for the family. They call him a little father. So the little father is like the oldest brother, and he's got to make sure his sisters get married off. He's got to make sure everybody's got provided for, even his parents. A lot of responsibility falls on the oldest brother. So when his brother had us over, he traveled from wherever he lives to be there to make sure everything went well and to help out. And so he insisted on serving. Come to find out, this guy is a professor of English. Not only a professor of English, but if I understood him right, and he's the head of the English department for like universities across India. So he is like the top guy of English professors. And yet, he came and he stood there the whole time serving us. And when you're done, you have to wash your hands before you eat. And most of the time they eat with their hands. And depending on where we were, we did or we didn't. A lot of times they give you spoons because they know that we don't usually eat that way. But then when you're done, you have to wash your hands because now you've usually been eating with your hands. And in someplace they have a washroom, but if they have like a well, you go outside, which is what was there. And he took a dipper, and you hold your hands, and then they pour the water over your hands so you can wash your hands. He'll dip some more. And so I told him, Professor Kumar, I think is his name. I said, I feel like I should be washing your hands. He said, really? I said, yeah. And he said, okay. And so then I got the dipper, and he hollered, hey, quick, get a camera. He wanted someone to take pictures of this. So I was like, I don't really understand, but I'm pouring water, and he's washing his hands, and he's making sure they're seeing this, that, I'm washing his hands. But anyway, they really just go out of their way to serve. And I thought that was a good example of also what Jesus teaches in John 13. In John 13, where he washed the disciples' feet, you'll recall. And he says in verses 13 and 14 of John 13, you call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. So Jesus established this principle that the one at the top can humble himself and serve others. And that's a lot of times what was going on here. It was kind of like the more prominent person in the family was the one who was doing the serving, and that was an honor to them to do that. And I think that really embodies this message of Jesus, that instead of just assigning service to some lower person, let the one, like in his case, he was the Lord. He was over all of them, but he was the one down there washing their feet. Speaking of that, Lemmy had told me that some of these people will want to wash our feet as part of their culture. He said, I find that a little uncomfortable, and I'm trying to send word ahead. They don't need to do that. So I was kind of prepared to experience that if they did, but he had done a good job of telling them they don't need to. But at one place, the first place we went, they came out and they took some water and they just kind of sprinkled it on our shoes. And so I think that was as close as we got to the whole experience in the full-on having your feet washed experience. Because you leave your shoes at the door, of course. We all mostly had on socks, but they are barefoot. Sometimes barefoot all the time, like out and everywhere they go, or they wear sandals, but not many of them having socks on. All right. Next up was, I thought this was interesting as well. They showed hospitality and they served. A lot of times they knew we were coming. They had done a lot of work to get ready, but there was one case where a surprising amount of hospitality, and it was all completely as in an unexpected case. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 13. Hebrews 13, verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now, you remember who that was. That was Abraham and Lot. And Abraham's just out minding his business, and these guys come by. Of course, he doesn't know they're angels / the Lord in some way. But he's like, hey, sir, come here and let me fix up a meal for you. And it was all kind of unexpected. And so he was commended for that, and Lot did the same thing. We experienced that on at least one occasion when we dropped in uninvited to this guy's house. So a little bit of story to that. His name is VJ, and he's a preacher. And the church where Lemmy preaches in South Africa in the past had supported him. And so they had a relationship. They knew him really well. They'd met several times. And then there's some kind of problem. And I didn't fully understand all the details, but it had something to do with this other group that he had started working with. And then because of that, Lemmy's church wasn't too sure about all that. And so they had stopped supporting him because they weren't sure what all he was kind of getting involved with. They weren't sure they could agree. And so they had lost contact with him. And they felt like, this is kind of unfortunate. And so since Lemmy's going, he's one of the elders there at that church, he said, I'll try to make contact with him, just to at least get the communication line reestablished. And so he had reached out. He had called a couple of times. The guy wouldn't answer his phone. He'd emailed him, no reply. So he's like, I don't know if we'll actually be able to meet with him or not, because he's not returning any of my calls. He won't answer the phone. And sadly, to be honest, if it was me, I would have taken that as he's not interested, and I would have moved on, But Lemmy had made a commitment. He was going to try, and he was not going to give up until he had tried to make contact. So he found somebody else that knew him, like a nephew, and that guy agreed to bring us to his house. So, in fact, it was so uncomfortable with me, the whole idea, that I thought, this is really kind of your thing, and if you don't need anybody else to go with you, we don't want to make it worse. We'll hang out at the hotel if you want to go. But we ended up all riding there together. And he's like, come on, and we'll go up. So we got to his apartment like 8 o'clock at night. And we walk up, and I'm already thinking we're not welcome. And on top of that, we're showing up, and he has no idea that we're coming. Nobody let him know. So we go up to his door. He lived in a second-floor apartment in this town. And they knocked on his door, and he opened the door, and there we were. And they were sitting at the table eating. And so he's like, come in, And so we go in. I took a picture sitting in his, this is the guy. He'd gone and changed. He had on like a casual wear. So let's see. That's his wife, daughter, wife's sister, and there's another girl somewhere around that was like a friend that was like lives with him. And so they had in this living area, there were 2 big cots. They had moved it out of the way by the time we got to this picture. But large, you could tell it's where somebody sleeps. So 2 people sleep kind of in the living room. You could see the laundry hanging on the strings up here. And when we got there, they had they were sitting at the table with food, eating. So he stopped eating and came and sat down with us. And they made kind of small talk. But you could tell it's really awkward, like tense, trying to like read the room there. They're like, well, how's your family? And so we talked for a little bit. And he said, our family is about to have a devotional. We'd like to invite you to stay for our evening devotion. I'm like, sure. So he rolled out these mats, and everybody sits down cross-legged on the floor. And they read some scriptures. They sang a few songs. He asked if I would like to say some things, so I shared a short talk. And then by the time that was over, the mood had completely lightened up, and everybody was smiling, everybody was talking, and it felt a lot better. Well, but we were ready to go. And he said, would you stay for supper? I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. He said, well, please, you have to have a little something. Let's do, he mentioned like one thing. You sure you can just eat this one thing? I didn't know what it was. I don't remember the name of it. Some dish. I thought maybe dessert or something. They do have some sweet stuff. And so Lemmy's looking at the rest of us like, you're okay if we stay for this? And so we thought, okay. Well, meanwhile, all the time, these women have been working. And they have this table set. Now, by the time I took this picture, they'd already cleared away half of it. We sat down, and they started bringing out the food. They had been in there cooking. They had already finished their meal, and now they're like making food for us. So we sat down, and they fed us. We had like 2 or 3 dishes. Again, fruit. These green things are guavas. I'd never had one before. Don't really recommend them, but they like them for some reason. And then oranges. They started bringing out all this food, and I thought, I tried to think through my mind, and I even talked to Sarah about it. What would happen if you just put yourself there? Somebody drops in, somebody just knocks on the door. You're just finishing up supper. Would we cook a whole nother meal and insist that they stay and eat? I don't know that we would have done that normally. But anyway, that's what they did. And by the time we were getting ready to leave, they said, hold on a minute. And they ran in the back, and they came out with gifts. And they gave each of us a gift. So we left with a gift and a belly full of food on a visit where we showed up unannounced and weren't really welcome at the beginning of it all. But and I learned a lot from that. I learned a lesson from Lemmy and how he handled that situation, because by the time it was all over, the communication was back again. He was able to talk to this guy, and like I thought that's really, really a lot of lessons in that story for me that I took away from that, including being hospitable, even when it's unexpected and you didn't plan for that. They went above and beyond to do that. Last story comes from this guy, Dinesh, really cool guy. So we had these preachers meetings at the last place we were. They had on Tuesday, it was all preachers from Churches of Christ. There was like 30 of them. And then on Thursdays, they had preachers from what they say denominational churches, and there was almost the same number there, but just about full both times. And so he was there. He's not a preacher. I don't really understand how he's like, his uncle is one of the preachers, I think. But he would come and he helped serve all the time. And his specialty is making tea. And he's also, this picture doesn't show you, he's a really big guy. So I started calling him Mr. T, and nobody got the joke but me. So not Lemmy or Comfort or anybody else. So finally I told Comfort, get your phone out and Google Mr. T. And he's like spelling it Mr. T-E-A. I'm like, no. It's just M-R space T. And then when he saw it, he started laughing. Because, this guy's like, you can tell he spends a lot of time in the gym. But his big thing was he was always bringing us tea, and it was really good. And it was different kinds of tea. It was like his specialty that he makes really good tea. And so I took this picture with the glass there. Well, afterwards, we would break for lunch. And most of the guys brought their lunch and a banana leaf, which are huge. I don't know if you've ever seen them. The big leaf. So I took some pictures, but I don't have them in here. What they would typically do is they would unroll this banana leaf, and then they put their rice and their stuff on that, and that becomes kind of like a plate that you can carry around, just rolled up banana leaf. So a lot of them would sit on the floor, or they would turn a chair around and set their banana leaf on the chair, and they would eat that way. But for us, of course, we get the full tablecloth service. It's all a little uncomfortable. And I kept trying to say, I wish we could just sit with everybody. That's the one downside to that idea. But they were really trying to honor us. They were trying to make us feel special everywhere we went. So we sat down at this table. I don't think I have another picture. No. We sat down at this table, and Dinesh and some of the other guys were serving us while everybody else was sitting on the floor. And but they had a very simple lunch, but we were having, again, the full, several dishes, and it was really good. So they loaded us up with rice. So they had this little pot with some fried chicken pieces in it, and they were good. I liked them, and they could tell. So they start giving me more. And so we finally get full. We're like, okay, no more. I can't eat anymore. We got to stop. And so then we got up, and they cleaned all that up, and we were just kind of standing around. I thought the study was about to resume, but they started setting that same table again. And those guys who had served us sat down. I think, oh, okay, well, now they're going to get to eat, because they hadn't eaten yet. They were serving us. And so this was one of the last days, and I'm finally starting to get some things, I guess, by that point. So somebody was putting the rice on, and I grabbed one of the other dishes with the gravy, and they got a big kick out of that too. They're like, oh, you're going to serve? I said, yeah, I can do this. And they're like, oh, okay. Now again, there people are taking pictures, and you know. So I start putting gravy. There's like 4 of them, I think, maybe 5 at the table. By the time I got to the last guy, I'm having to tilt it up and scrape this thing out. There wasn't much left. And then I said, would you like some chicken? They're like, yeah. And I opened up the container with chicken, and there was only like 4 pieces. One of them didn't want any, and there was enough for each of the others to have one. They were small. So this guy, I get around to him, I'm giving him like 1 little piece of chicken. And it hit me that the whole time he had stood there giving me more, that was the same chicken they were all going to eat. Whatever we didn't eat that was their food. And so they were happy to like load me up with seconds and smiling the whole time, glad for me to eat as much or more than I even wanted, even though that meant they knew when it was time for them to sit down and eat, there wasn't going to be hardly anything left. And I felt about that big, and I wished that I hadn't had seconds. I felt bad about eating so much and being full, knowing that the same guys who served me were happy to do without. It was more important for them to be of service and to show kindness than to have plenty themselves. So let's look at Philippians chapter 2. 2 more verses before we conclude. Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. I think that really captures the heart of that. And then finally, 1 Peter 4, verse 9. First Peter 4, verse 9. Show hospitality to one another without complaining, without grumbling. And I was thinking, if you had guests and you had young men and you had people serving and there wasn't enough of the main course, to go around, you'd have to practice that. Show hospitality without grumbling, without complaining, to have a smile, to be happy to do it, even though that means you're not going to have a big lunch, you're not going to have enough to eat yourself. I was just really impressed with with the attitude that was on display there, learning as I went about how their culture was about service. So here's to summarize: hospitality includes showing love to strangers, and let's look for opportunities, I think, to be more hospitable. Let's just challenge ourselves to learn from that, and when we have the opportunity to show kindness to others, especially people we don't know. That's at the heart of hospitality. And then you think about, what excuses do I have for not doing that? I don't have a lot. Well, they had very little, and they were very generous. We should serve, and then even when we haven't had time to plan, and we think I don't have a nice place, or everything's not just right. I mean, none of that stopped them from being hospitable. And so I thought that's a good lesson as well. And then to try to embody that same selfless attitude that Jesus taught, and it's supposed to be, something that we as Christians embody as well. So that was the first lesson that really just kind of jumped out at me from the whole experience. I thought, this is a good thing for me to witness and be part of and experience and to try to learn from. And so hopefully that's been encouraging and helpful to you as well. There hadn't really been a lesson, of course, about how to become a Christian. We'll talk a lot more about that, I think, when I get into some of the lessons that we shared and different people that we met. We'll save that for another day. But if there is someone here today who needs to make something right in your life, and if we can help you with that, we would be glad to do so if you'll let us know as we stand and sing.